Welcome to Translation Confidential. This is Patrick and Peter, and hey, this is episode 145. The things you absolutely have to talk about when you talk about AI and translation. And I think, Patrick, a great place to start is what this show is not going to be, right? So this show is not going to be where we go, oh, look at the silly mistake AI translation made. That's silly. This is not going to be that show striking out against AI saying, hey, this is the end of our industry. This is the end of translate. This is not that show, right? What this show is in the spirit of what Translation Confidential was started with all those years ago, is that we want to give translation buyers, translators, anybody in our ecosystem, agency owners, kind of a look behind the curtain, because there's a lot of agency owners that haven't dived into this yet, right? We've talked about this. There are many, of course, that are really into this and understand it far better than I do. But our hope is that by the end of the show that you understand a little bit more about AI and what you should be considering, again, whether you're a translation buyer or somewhere else in our ecosystem. So, hey, let's get rolling.
Yeah, I think the first thing we want to talk about is, and again, to me, like a lot of this is sounding very similar to like the machine translation arguments from 20, 30 years ago at that point when it was kind of becoming mainstream. So it's kind of interesting to see, of course, that time is a flat circle here, and we're kind of revisiting similar topics with a different means on them. But I think we first want to talk about like where does your AI come from? How was your engine trained, and questions like that.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And the point there is that just like machine translation in the day, right? There were different engines, and there still are, right? There's still plenty of machine translation engines out there. It's just, many of them are either enabled by AI or they have some QA in the loop or, whatever the case is. But let's say this is a blanket statement that all AI translation isn't created equally. Far from it. So you really have to understand what is the content, what is your mission, to understand which engine you want to use. And of course, I think it goes without saying, we've talked about it a million times. We've talked about it with MT. It's the same discussion with AI. If you are using the free model, you are putting yourself in some danger, right?
The training pool.
Exactly. Whatever you do for free, there's a cost. And that cost is, hey, we can use your data. So first thing, if you're experimenting with this, open up your wallet, get a paid version so it's not used for the greater good.
Anonymize your data that you're putting in there.
Or anonymize your data, which that's another step and requires. So I think it's far easier to just, get into the ecosystem, pick whatever engine it is. In fact, feel free to test other engines. But I mean, I think the point of that, Patrick, right, is it's why the easy button is rarely easy. You just don't know it. There's work into figuring out these workflows. This is not for the faint of heart.
Yeah, I mean, even just think of AI, I'm thinking even in personal use or like when I use it for work, I think the more context that you can give the engines when you are prompting them is super helpful, because obviously they're learning from all of your previous prompts. So whether it's doing a custom GPT where you have a set of instructions, I had a colleague who was like, I hate responding to emails. So he put all of his sent emails into, he pulled an export and put it into ChatGPT and said, I don't want to respond to emails anymore. I'm going to send you emails and write a reply that sounds like me. So he took all of his previous data that said, this is how I sound in email, fed it to the engine, and then it would spit out replies for him. So he wouldn't have to kind of use that mental energy to reply to emails anymore. So again, had he just said reply to this email for me, it would have gotten a very different response than when he prompted and trained the engine to sound like him.
Absolutely. It would have been a far different voice in his responses. And I think that's where people, I understand the allure of it, right? It's sexy that, oh my goodness, I hit the easy button and now I've got translation. But the point of the matter is is there a QA pass? Is there, what is the training that you did for the engine? Because the fact of the matter is you can do far better, but you have to have some strategy. And I think that's where talking to a professional makes a lot of sense. Say, hey, I mean, with some of these client discussions we've had, these are folks that have a significant translation memory volume, or at a minimum, a significant amount of translated content that's already been approved. Well, that needs to be leveraged, because I think with a lot of these themes, the recurring theme we're going to hear today is that AI that is not levered to some type of database, whether that's a translation management system. Blackbird has their new data lake concept. The bottom line is some repository of what is considered approved translation. You're going to be reinventing the wheel every time. That's going to be a theme that we talk about.
I think too, like AI, I think you can likely use AI to build a translation memory. Say, look at this source language page, look at this other page, put them together into a database and utilize those translations in the future. Like it sounds kind of silly, like Inception a little bit here, but it's like use AI to make your database to help AI translate better in the future. Like that seems like a simple step you can take if you don't have translation memory or some sort of database. It's like, hey, smart tool who can do this, go build that for me.
Absolutely. And I think there's value in all of that content. I mean, the other thing is you could say, I don't know, if you have like a bilingual person on staff, or you hire someone to do this, say, hey, we have all this translated content, we need to create a glossary. I mean, AI can do that very well also. You could just say, hey, I need a glossary out of this, leverage what's been translated already, and then you have someone review it, right? So what is AI really good at is figuring out sentence patterns and word patterns and analyzing and compiling all of that data. Having a glossary is amazing. Like, it'll also help your, sort of the machine translation idea. It'll help any QA models you build. And I think one of the things that you brought up in pre-show, Patrick, which I think is really good, is what language? Because of course, Spanish is freaking amazing, right? Because why? Well, it's leveraged the internet, right? I think, again, we have to talk just very quickly about what AI is. AI is always just trying to predict the next word in a pattern, right? That's all it is. And the way that it does it is it ate the internet. Like, it literally ate the entire internet.
Still eating too.
Still eating the internet. And it's doing it on a daily basis. And by doing that, it's really good at patterns. I mean, I was thinking of like some examples this morning. I think all of us went to school with that one kid who basically ingested the sporting news, and you'd say, oh, well, what was Hank Aaron's batting average? Oh, I know what Hank Aaron's batting average was. I mean, it's that guy, right, who ingested all the statistics and knew what every baseball player's whatever pitcher's ERA was. And that's AI on massive amounts of steroids, right? It's finally the computing power allowed for all of this, and we should lean into that. So the languages are important. Yeah, if you use an LLM, whatever, which one you want to use, and you try to create a translation in a language of limited diffusion, I guarantee you the results aren't going to be as strong as they were if you did the same passage in Spanish. So you have to put a global strategy in. All right, I have 14 languages in my build, and your approach might be slightly different by language. You might have to leverage humans a little more in some of the other languages. Makes sense.
It was a great baseball analogy, including steroids there. Just want to put that out there.
Yes.
But yeah, like you're saying, like, not that it's right, wrong, good or bad. I think it's just a fact of like, not all languages are created equally in AI. Like we talked about, it's really dependent on the inputs, and the input here is scraping the internet. And I would say, I don't have the statistics in front of me, but I would hazard to guess that English is the prevailing language on the internet kind of globally. So English AI is probably phenomenal. I don't think that's a stretch to say. Where, like you said, if you go to languages that don't have a large base of speakers or access to the internet or whatever it might be, then obviously the AI product needs to be trained, and it's not going to be the equivalent good of those languages that are much more common and have all those speakers to kind of review and train the engine and point it in the right direction, rather than just say, oh, sure, we can do, this this language with 50,000 global speakers, like you're probably not going to have a good translation come out of that.
100%. I mean, the fact for me, or the carryover, the most important thing from that little piece of the discussion is its strategy, right? It's sit down with someone who understands the LLMs and who understands basic process and translation workflows, and look at your language list. And again, if your one language is Spanish, well, it's far easier than if you have 14 languages and 4 of those are languages of limited diffusion. But just put a strategy together of how you're going to do this. I mean, the thing that I think we don't hear, and this was a really good example that happened in a recent presentation that I went to, and it was talking about AI. It was about AI speech translation. So this is, it's interpretation, but using AI essentially, right? Versus human. Someone asked the efficacy of the AI, and someone or the speaker said, it's interesting. I don't know that people ever talked about the scores of what a human interpreter was. And I think this is kind of the same problem, just wrapped in a different box, right? Because suddenly in written translation, there's people just willing to completely abdicate to AI, like, oh yeah, it's going to be good. It's going to be awesome. And I think, as we've said over and over and over again, in the eyes of the consumer, whoever's consuming your written translation, website, app, whatever it is, help article, if 98% of it is really good and 2% of it, you really did a bad job on that 2%, like there's one key sentence and the meaning was completely off, they're going to judge you on that one mistake. And
yeah, it's weighted.
It's weighted. Absolutely. People are going to be, oh my gosh, did it miss the boat? And it could just be, maybe it was the English was vague and the LLM didn't handle it properly. So that's why we have to have a proper QA process, human in the loop, using some forms of AI to do QA and alert to different things. Let's go back to the Blue score and quality scores. I mean, do something. There's models out there. Taos has a model to
we're gonna bring it back to baseball too, but just think of okay, you have the human umpire, and then after the game, Twitter releases the umpire score for every game. It's like, ooh, they were 3 inches in on the inside of the plate during this game, or 3 inches outside. They were giving them that extra zone, and they grade the umpires, which I think is, people have always said the age old thing in baseball is that umpires are bad and they want robot umpires. And so I think baseball and MLB is doing a cool thing this year where there's going to be a challenge system in place for kind of those more egregious calls that are obviously not what the umpire called. But I think, like we said, that doesn't mean they're going straight and all in to just, oh, nope, it's all robot umpires immediately. I think they're kind of gradually going to get to a system where it's both humans and robot umpires. But I think that's obviously different industry and use case, but they're not just going straight to the end and saying robots and AI only. It's going to be human centered with AI assist, basically.
So measured steps.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like a good idea. And I think one of the things that people aren't talking about as well is I give a client story, right? So a client tells me, hey, we're not really happy with our human translation provider. They're tough to work with, and I won't mention the name, but it's one of the largest agencies in the world. And it's a common knock you hear against them that, hey, my project manager keeps changing, my account manager keeps changing, they're missing deadlines, I feel like they charge me at every turn for every single crazy little thing. And yeah, it's all the stuff that you tend to hear about some of the big guys. And she's like, well, we got this figured out now. So we're going to use the onboard translation and the tool that we use. It's free. You just say translate and it translates it. And by the way, we have very technical material. This material is so technical that the way that we get this proofread is we have a senior engineer in our office in France do the review of the translation. And immediately I'm like, what? And I think what people are missing is, what is the true cost of your translation? This is something that's been a question for 30 years and it continues, right? Because this was always, clients in the old days would say, oh, we got our offices all over the world, let's have them do that. So if, again, whether it's translation, whether it's MTP, machine translation, or AI translation and post-editing, whatever that activity is, you have to take the sum of all the labor that's involved. The agency charges me, let's just say $1,000 to do this translation. All right, Let's say it takes a senior engineer who's not a translator, by the way, who can't perform at, proofreading 5,000 words a day or whatever the case is. They just can't. They don't do that for a living, right? And you take their hourly rate and figure that out. What's the ROI on this? It's the DIY question, whether, hey, like I can do this project at home or I can hire a professional. What is the quality of the output? What is that cost? All too often people are saying, well, that's an internal resource. It's free. It is not free. And I think your CFO or anyone that's in charge of that person would beg to differ that it's not free. So I think that's a small component. But again, whatever your solution set is you have to think of the return on the investment. And if you're deploying a senior engineer to review AI translation, I'm no mathematician, but I can certainly run a spreadsheet, and I guarantee you I could run a spreadsheet that would tell you that was a poor investment.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes people get caught up in the thing that they do. Like if their department is translation, like that's all they worry about. But like a lens I always try to use is like, okay, what's the business impact of this? Like you said, like, great, we're going to take this engineer off of engineering tasks. So we're also not just his hourly rate, but then you need to subtract the value he's adding somewhere else that the engineer is doing for their day job. So that's like business process management 101. But again, not everyone has that lens all the time. So I think making sure you consider that as you are maybe pulling people in who either aren't qualified, isn't their day job, or maybe don't even want to do this. So who knows what level of effort that engineer might put into it. Those all come into place. Definitely want to consider those as you are, like you said, coming up with your strategy of how you're going to do translation and how you're going to leverage AI.
Absolutely. There's an opportunity cost, and we're going to cover that because there's multiple types of opportunity cost associated with the translation process. But another important piece of this, and I feel like very few people are talking about this, certainly people that don't know our industry, but there's a very important missing piece of the process, and we have to talk about it. And that is the feedback loop, tethered to some form of database. And here's why that's important. So when you use the easy button and you're using onboard translation, that's not tethered to a translation memory or a database of approved translations that have previously been completed. Every time you go to translate something, it starts over. Because why? Well, the AI is evolving. It's getting smarter. What did we say? It keeps eating the internet. It keeps getting smarter. It's not a bad thing. However, remember that engineer that is now your overpaid editor? All that work that he or she did, making changes, modifying, oh, look at this miserable translation, let me fix this. And then you release to the client. Sometime in the future, you make changes. Well, last time I checked, systems like Rise and Articulate and all these other systems, Salesforce Knowledge Base, whatever it is, they don't have track changes. It's just data that lives in a database. So what do? You have to translate the whole article again. So all that work, it's gone. So now you have to send it to the engineer again to preview and read the whole thing again. You changed one sentence and he's got to read the whole thing again because you have no way of leveraging what's been approved and done in the past. And I cannot understand how people are missing this point. If those of us in the industry get it, of course we get it. But the point here is you're continually using a sledgehammer when a ball peen hammer is what you need.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I'm just thinking it boils down to a matter of version control. Like if you have something that's V1 and it gets all the way to V10 and it's released at V10, you're like, great, time to start V11. Let's start at V1. That seems like outrageous and silly. Like you would start with the basis and your polished product of V10. So like, why are we going back to the start as opposed to somehow, like you said, capturing how we got to V10 and all the great things that's there. And then really, like we've talked about in the past, I mean, this is translation memory 101. It's like, you want to work on the differential. You don't want to work on the same things that you've already done. You want to really focus your team's time and energy on what is different from the last version.
Absolutely. I mean, not properly closing this feedback loop is going to cost you thousands upon thousands upon thousands of dollars. Remember when we talked about that ROI calculation? So you're putting the hourly rate of who's involved. Well, now put the hourly rate of whoever else is involved in terms of design, or if there's voiceover for a given project or whatever it might be. I mean, this is hours and hours of labor just flushed down the toilet. And this,
Oh, and then
yeah,
multiply by the number of languages.
absolutely. I mean, absolutely. And again, this is where that opportunity cost comes in. So let's say, Patrick, you bring up a great point. So we're publishing in 4 languages. I'm taking 4 engineers off of the line to do these reviews over and over again. So you have so many different types of opportunity cost here. You have the opportunity cost of this engineer that's doing this review. And let's be honest, an engineer is an engineer. They're not a translator. They're not trained to do this work. A translator might take 4 hours, and of course their hourly rate is far less than the engineer. The engineer might take 8 hours. But my question that Patrick posed earlier is, what are they not doing that's really part of the job that you pay them to do? And the bigger thing is how did this delay the process? Are you not releasing a product for 3 more weeks because you have this delay? So, what is that opportunity cost? If it's help content, is there some frustrated user out there that's not getting an question answered? And I know this is going to be controversial, not to those of us in the industry, but those of us outside. Got news for you. Your engineer, they're not trained to be a translator. So do they understand consistency in language and terminology? How's their grammar? One of our best translators was someone from our French team. And she always used to tell me, do you know, Peter, that in France, and I would argue this is probably true here in the States as well. I mean, think of it. If you have a very focused degree like engineering, I mean, I can even say for myself with a business degree, which, it's a business degree. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a doctor. The focus wasn't on English grammar. So how strong are my grammar skills compared to someone who's a translator? They're not as strong. They're just not. The engineer, not as strong. You might have the random one, the random few that have very strong grammar skills, but what is the quality of that output? So not only did you pay a fortune on an hourly basis, but my question is, what is the quality? And I'm not going to make huge, broad overgeneralizations, but I don't think it's a stretch for me to argue that the quality isn't going to be where you think it is.
No, I mean, think of it too. Like I'm thinking in terms of PMs. Like project managers often brush up against the world of finance. I mean, you have to track your budget, you have to track your margin, you have to track your profitability, which I would say to an accounting or finance person are like 101 type of metrics. But like, again, PMs, I think, understand how those work and how to maneuver around issues with margin and things like that. But I am not a finance person. Like, couldn't do a balance sheet, couldn't do all of like the more in detailed stuff. So you're in our scenario, like the engineer may know enough to be dangerous, but maybe they're not still the best person for that job of being the true expert at that thing that we're trying to do.
And all these issues, Patrick, are all interrelated. They're all interrelated. So now that we're at this point and we're talking about the quality of what goes to the end user, right? Again, just because you used an engineer doesn't mean the translation's now suddenly amazing. I would argue the contrary. And then I'm going to go a little bit deeper. Let's go back to the quality of the AI discussion. Remember we said if you use off-the-shelf AI, it's not as good as, a trained model with, a good strategy on how the QA is handled and how segments that are below a certain watermark are flagged for additional review. There's the thing called reviewers fatigue. And this was a thing that used to happen in the early days of machine translation. Again, not trained engines. We've done shows on how to train an MT engine. So we've talked about that stuff. Refer to older episodes about that. But AI is the same way. So remember we talked about the languages of limited diffusion and how the quality is going to be less. So let's talk about technical material. Maybe the LLM isn't as well versed, whatever the case may be. Reviewers fatigue with terrible AI translation, machine translation, wherever it comes from. Human translation, I mean, how many times, Patrick, as project managers, have we heard, when maybe a translator was a little bit out of their element on a topic, and the proofreader says, "Hey, I had to dig in on that one. That was a fair amount of work. My review was rather extensive. You may want to think twice about using that translator for that subject matter again because it seemed like it was a bit of a stretch." Well, it's no different with a large language model. So my tenet on that is that with reviewers fatigue, you just start to accept stuff. Good enough. Good enough. The larger the project, the more that fatigue sets in. So, we circle back to what are we talking about here is that a lack of a global strategy puts you in a real terrible place here.
Yeah, that's, I think we've talked about that, like you said, at length with the machine translation a couple of years ago. And I think, like you said, same thing is true now. So just, again, making sure that you can kind of process some of these things out of being a concern if you kind of, yes, having a good strategy, but I think operationalizing and processing that strategy can pay huge dividends.
Absolutely. Let's not minimize the importance of translation in our workplace. I mean, that's the important part. And I think, finally, a good place to wrap is, also what message are you sending to the marketplace or your customers? I've heard it. I've seen it, right? We even, what do we say when we buy, one of these products that inherently comes from China and the instructions are so ridiculous in English? You're like, okay, yeah, they don't really care. I mean, and maybe it's like a flippant comment, but imagine if you're selling something high end or the service you're providing is high end. And now suddenly the translation looks like you spent 5 minutes on it. Or you're doing a knowledge base article for your employees that don't speak English. And it's absolutely terrible. And what message are you sending? You're not important enough for me to put the proper energy into this effort. And is that the message that you want to put into the marketplace, whether internal or external?
Yeah, I think we've said it before too. There's sometimes, maybe not sometimes, maybe most times, no translation can be better than bad translation. Like what message are you sending if you're putting out a poor quality translation versus if you just hadn't done it to begin with and you only publish in the source language? I think until you kind of get your ducks in a row and come up with that strategy and process, like sometimes it's better to do nothing and kind of preserve the quality of your source language rather than bring it into another language where you're not prepared to do so effectively.
Yeah. And again, Patrick, what have we said over the years is that the common theme here is communication with the professionals. Like, just, it doesn't cost much other than a little bit of time to have a conversation with your provider and say, here's my quandary. I'm currently doing no translation for my employees, but we have a need. We have to figure something out. What is the strategy? It's all right. What's important? Can we use AI speech translation, but make it very clear to our clients, which in this case would be their employees, to say, hey, this is AI generated. We really feel like we want to try to communicate more with you. We want to see what level of engagement we get, and as hopefully we improve.
Frame it as a pilot.
Exactly. And I think just as long as we're honest and candid with our customers, again, whether internal or external, same with external, maybe, you're rolling into a country, but be honest about it. You can even say, these instructions are AI generated. Any feedback you can provide is valued, and we're going to continue to improve our process. How about
I think,
being
like
candid?
you said, that's the feedback loop, though. Again, it doesn't necessarily have to come from your language service provider, but your constituents in this case that are absorbing that content that you're putting out in the other language. They can hopefully very quickly tell you, like, yeah, what we're outputting is bad, like, do better, or like, it's okay, it's good enough, like, we can get by with it. I think getting that feedback from the people who are absorbing that content and digesting it is also super valuable. And again, frame it as a pilot, put the asterisk and say this is AI generated. And kind of, like we said, you can you can process that out and improve it and keep improving.
Absolutely. Well, this was good. I think this was one of our soapbox episodes. I love this discussion. This could go on for hours, I'm sure. Patrick, what's your big takeaway? Back to our takeaway here. What's your big takeaway from this discussion?
Yeah, I think it's kind of twofold. Is like we've talked about having some sort of well, I'll call it language strategy, because obviously that would entail both translation and interpretation. But having some sort of strategy, and then kind of the PM in me is go straight to operations, but like yes, have that high level strategy and like our pie in the sky goal, but like those details and that process and those operations can really make or break your strategy. So a strategy is a great place to start, but you really have to think through all the steps. And I think that's where like a good project management person or operations professional can help, maybe pressure test the strategy and flag those risks and look out for those pitfalls rather than just be like, our AI strategy is this, our language strategy is this, and like, sure, that sounds great. But I think where rubber hits the road is where it can get really interesting of how you deploy these kinds of things. I mean, we've talked about it as well with some of the flashy AI demos, and it's like, ooh, I have like 10 questions that came out of that one, as opposed to like live speech translation works instantly. It's like, yep, when you use, a fourth grade vocabulary and register, sure, it does great. But when you get into a technical manual, it's probably going to fall flat.
Yeah, I mean, I like that, Patrick. And for me, I mean, I love everything we talked about today. I thought all these points are super salient to this whole discussion, right? I think, but for me, the one that I think people overlook the most is look at the true return on investment of your inputs and what you're doing in translation and what the risks are. What is my opportunity cost in terms of like, if I'm not doing this translation fast enough or I'm not providing the translation at the quality I need, look at the true economic impact of the entire process from start, all your inputs to finish to when you're releasing it to your customer. I think you really have to dive in and don't fool yourself, right? I mean, I think it's super easy to go, oh, it's an internal resource. That doesn't cost me anything. Do not fool yourself. There is a huge cost. And I think if everybody looks at their process with that in mind, I think they would likely come up to some different decisions. So, well, with that, we'll wrap up this episode of Translation Confidential. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.